Welcome to Avenue M. My name is Joey Taylor.
And I'm Haroon Mogul.
We're two men on a journey of faith and meaning. In each episode, we sit down with a remarkable guest to unpack the moments that shape us, the struggles that build us, and the questions that intrigue us. Today's guest is Paul Vigna. Paul is an author and former reporter for the Wall Street Journal. We speak to him about his latest book, The Almightier: How Money Became God, Greed Became Virtue, and Debt Became Sin. In this conversation, we dive into the intricate relationship between money, morality, and society. We explore the historical evolution of wealth, the moral implications of capitalism, and the cultural narratives that shape our understanding of money today. From the Renaissance to modern America, this conversation challenges conventional wisdom and invites you to rethink the role of money in our lives.
Paul, I'm going to start with a story that connects to your book. I'm teaching an Islamic history class at a mosque here in Cincinnati. And at the end of the class, I always tell the students 14 and up, all the way to senior citizens, you can ask me anything, and I'm happy for you to take the conversation in whatever direction you want to go. Keeps me on my toes. And a young woman raises her hand, high school student, and she says, in response to an overview of Muslim Spain, that seems like wealth distorted the politics of that country, that empire, whatever you want to call it. And then she asks a very simple, very profound question. She says, and I love the look on her face because she really wanted an answer. And I knew the minute she let the question out of her mouth, there was no way to provide her the answer she needed. She said, when did money go from being a means to an end? And my initial response was going to be, well, people have always been greedy. But I was reading your book, and your book makes the argument that, and I'll let you define it, but the nature of greed, the way we think about money, how we idolize, fetishize, and pursue wealth has changed substantially.
Yes.
And so I wanted to ask you where that story started, because it's a story that feels deeply relevant, but also tells a history that probably a lot of us, certainly myself, did not know much about.
I will add that I did not know a lot about it when I first started writing the book, to be honest. The way the book came out was not exactly the way I envisioned it. I didn't really know what I was going for when I started it. I just had an idea about, I wanted to explore the relationship between money and virtue and why we seem to hold the idea of wealth as a virtue in and of itself, to your student's question, right? When did it become an end in itself? I wanted to explore that. I didn't know where the book was going to go. So I just started digging into the history of money and ended up finding a narrative, finding a thread that I could pull on that really went all the way back to the very beginning of money. And I think that is what is really interesting. The answer to your student's question is that money stopped becoming a means and started becoming an end probably 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, if not longer. That this has been a problem for a really long time in our culture. And I think what has happened in the last 600 years, specifically when you start looking at American culture and our attitudes towards money, and I spent a lot of time in the book talking about that 600-year time period. I think a lot of our current attitudes began almost exactly 600 years ago. But it goes even further back than that. And I talk about that in the book, too. I tried to do it all in a very brief amount of time, too. This is not a 1,000-word book. It was a very conscious thing in my mind that I didn't want to write a 1,000-word book that had every tidbit of history. I wanted to tell one story. I wanted to keep it kind of focused. And I think I managed that. But the real answer is it started a very, very long time ago. And part of that, I think, is because desire is an innate part of our nature. Wanting things is an innate part of our nature. And once we saw what money could get us, wanting money became an innate part, seemingly an innate part of our nature.
Definitionally, can we start from me? Tell me, how do you define what is money? Is it is it a means for exchange? Is it a value holder? Is it something else? Give us kind of a basic orientation to how you think about money.
There are two things about that. My personal definition of money is that it is basically an accounting system. It is a way for society to assign a token to resources and then distribute those resources. I think that is the most utilitarian definition of money that you can have. That is just a way for society to keep track of our resources and distribute them. The interesting thing is that money has a lot of functions that we have given it. It is the classic definition of money, which you'll hear in probably most introductory economics classes, is that it is a store of value, a means of exchange, and a unit of account. And what I think was interesting about that definition is that that is actually a description of its functions. That is not a definition of what money is. So my definition, I humbly think, is better. It's an accounting system. And what I think is interesting about that is that what that tells you something about money that you may have never thought about. What that tells you is that money isn't real. Money is not a thing. Money does not, the famous saying, money doesn't grow on trees. Yeah, money doesn't grow on trees. Money doesn't grow in fields. Money doesn't grow in hillsides. It doesn't grow in the country. You can't cultivate it, grow it, or harvest it. It is not a real thing. It is a system. It is a method that we invented to help us do a thing, which is distribute resources. So that's what I think money is. I think the problem is most people define it by its uses, the three that I just gave you. And then the bigger problem is that I think we have mythologized it and we have fetishized it. We've made it even more than that. We have made it more than just a utilitarian product, a system. We have, and this is what I argue in the book, we have essentially turned it into our godhead. It is the thing around which our entire society revolves. It is the way to have any kind of security and riches and power. We've tied everything up into money. And I think the problem is that not only did we do that, but most people don't understand what money is in the first place. And unwinding that is really difficult.
So Yuval Noah Harari says that money is the most successful story ever told in human history. Would you say that it's the most successful religion in human history?
Well, I mean, if you wanted to define success by how many people follow a religion, I mean, I don't know offhand, off the top, you guys probably know. I don't know off the top of my head how many Muslims there are, how many Christians there are, how many Buddhists there are, but, large numbers of those. But on the other hand, probably everybody is part of the Church of Money. So yes, you could make that argument that money is the most successful religion in the history of mankind. Sure, I'll go with that.
What I thought was really interesting in the book is you identify the Renaissance, and specifically Italy, as a site where there's this shift around how money is conceptualized. And it was really interesting to me, and there's a lot of questions that followed from here, but I'll start with this, is that it seems like religion is a catalyst for a redefinition of wealth. Or perhaps religion incubates or justifies a very different way of thinking about wealth and the pursuit of wealth than anything that preceded before. So you did say 3,000-4,000 years ago, human beings start thinking about wealth differently. But then, as you did say in the beginning, there is a shift in modern times. What's that shift? What's happening? And where does religion come into it?
There is a very distinct shift, which it's really interesting to me because most of the people that I talk about in the book are well-known historical figures. The era that I'm talking about is actually a well-known historical era. The things I'm talking about that happened in that era, in that time with those figures is not well known at all. And that was what kind of really surprised me about that. So what am I talking about? This is what I'm talking about. In the early 1400s in Florence, Italy, there is a group of people, thinkers, intellectuals, readers, merchants, and some religious, part of the religion, trying to sort of recapture the glories of ancient Rome and ancient Greece. And part of the reason they're trying to do that is because previous to that, you had the Black Death, which swept over Europe. Half the population is wiped out. Everything has to kind of be rebuilt and refigured and reconstituted and rethought. And so they're really open to new ideas. In Florence, Italy, at this time, the early 1400s, Florence, Italy was a very mercantile city. It was basically a commercial city. It was a big commercial hub. The people living there thought that wealth was a good thing, that having wealth was a good thing, that pursuing wealth was a good thing. That was not something you could be open about at the time because that was completely going against the Catholic Church's teachings, right? So what happens is that all changes in the 1400s. And I spent a lot of time talking about a writer named Poggio Bracciolini, who I had never heard of before I started writing this book. And I was at Dow Jones and Company for 25 years. I worked on the newswires. I worked at the Wall Street Journal. I was in and out of markets, covered them very closely, talked to economists all the time, read books about it, studied it. Never heard this guy's name ever once in my life. No one talks about Poggio Bracciolini. Poggio Bracciolini wrote a dialogue in the 1400s that redefined wealth and the pursuit of wealth. And in it, he makes the argument that, for lack of a better word, greed is good. He literally comes out and says that. And why is this important? It's important because Poggio was part of that circle of thinkers and influential people that included Cosimo de' Medici, the famous banker, who uses this, what I end up calling this ethos of beneficial greed. He uses that in his business and in his life, becomes the most powerful man in Europe, wildly popular figure. And what's interesting about him is that he's a commoner. He's not a noble, he's not a duke, he's not a king. He's just a regular person who shows that regular people can pursue wealth on their own, that is not dirty and evil like the church is telling you, that it is actually okay to do this. And to your point, Haroon, at one point in our history, that could have gotten him excommunicated, that could have gotten him burned at the stake. A lot of bad things could have happened from that, but they didn't, because the church itself was starting to adopt this ethos of beneficial greed. The Archbishop of Florence was a very influential writer and thinker, and he was extolling what Cosimo was exemplifying. Another person in this group became Pope Nicholas V. Nicholas V brings this ethos into the church. He starts to use the church as a money-making machine, as a way to make money, to build up wealth, and then to spend it. And I should say, I have not defined my ethos of beneficial greed well. So let me define that briefly. So the ethos of beneficial greed, the idea was we should encourage people to go out and make money, to become wealthy, and then to use their wealth for the benefit of our city, for the benefit of our society. And what you saw was people like Cosmo, people like Nicholas got very, very wealthy and spent that money lavishly. Cosimo supported artists, he supported architects, he supported construction projects. He was a one-man economic stimulus program. Nicholas used the church's money-making ability to bring in a lot of money and then to spend it. He rebuilt Vatican City. What we have today, and when you go to see Vatican City, you see St. Peter's, you see all the buildings. All those plans were begun under Nicholas. He wanted to rebuild the church, which at the time was actually very poor. This is a sea change in how greed is viewed in Europe. This starts in Florence, it moves to Rome, the church embraces it, and it grows from there. And then when Europeans start coming to the Americas, they are bringing this ethos with them, and then it starts growing here. And I spend most of the book tracing the growth of that. But the bottom line is that in the early 1400s in Florence, Italy, all of the attitudes about wealth and the pursuit of wealth that we have today were born.
I think it may be important because when you use the word greed and you start to talk about how the church is transitioning to see its utilitarian kind of purposes, it's easy for me to translate it myself into kind of my Protestant sort of mindset, which says something like the church was forcing people to pay for indulgences, and that's what led to something like the Protestant Reformation. I don't think you are exactly making those sort of moral claims as you trace the historical development of greed and money. So could you just talk a little bit about a little bit of like the so what in terms of the morality of all this?
Sure. No. Well, actually, I mean, I am actually. This ethos grows and grows, and it does become decadent. Nicholas V was Pope in roughly the 1450s. He was only Pope for about, I think it was less than 10 years, but he started the church down this path. A century later, when the Pope is Leo X, the church has become fantastically wealthy and incredibly decadent. And Leo, who actually, it turns out, maybe not too surprisingly, is a Medici. He is Cosimo's great-great-grandson. He uses the church as a money-making machine for himself and his family. I mean, he is incredibly corrupt. The morality of it is black and white. It is terrible what he is doing. And his primary vehicle is the sale of indulgences. And he sends his people out into the countryside to aggressively sell indulgences. Not just that you can buy forgiveness of your own sins. You can buy forgiveness of your deceased loved ones' sins. They're doing anything and they're making money, and it is abhorrent to some people, one of them being a gentleman named Martin Luther. And yes, it does start the Protestant Reformation. And I think you can see in that historical episode, whatever, that what I'm talking about, this ethos of beneficial greed, it is very easy for that to wash over any kind of moral collars put upon greed and become a very a bad thing for society. And that's exactly what happened with the Catholic Church. It became wildly powerful, wildly rich, wildly decadent, and it was really a net negative for society. That's why people like Martin Luther rebelled against it.
I think it may be important to identify yourself as, at least you grew up Catholic, right? So we're not just talking crap about the church just in
Yes.
general, right?
I'm half Italian, half Irish. I was raised Roman Catholic, made my communion, made my confirmation. Yeah, look, I don't consider myself a believer anymore, but it's a weird thing in that culturally I'm very much still a Roman Catholic. I've studied other religions. I've thought from time to time, maybe I'll become something else. Like maybe there's another religion out there, and I can't do it. I just can't do it. I mean, I can give up the church. I don't go to church anymore. I can give up the church. I'll be very blunt. I don't believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ, which I make clear in the book. I do believe in the moral philosophy of the man named Jesus Christ. So that's a distinction for me. But culturally, I can't give up that Roman Catholicism. It's just part of my background. It's part of who I am. So it's a very weird kind of thing, actually. So that's where I'm coming from. I was raised Roman Catholic. Don't go to church anymore. Don't consider myself a believer. I actually have a whole theory about religion, which we can get into later. But that's where I'm coming from. To answer your question, that's where I'm coming from.
I'm glad that you said that, because the question I wanted to ask you was, one of the core tenets of the philosophy, the moral philosophy of Jesus, is that the love of money is the root of all evil. So tell me, how is that true?
Well, I think that's a quote from St. Paul. But to your point, I mean, Jesus spends a lot of time talking about money and the morality of money. So it is very much a core part of his philosophy, his moral philosophy. I don't know where you want to go with that. I mean, Jesus clearly sees greed as a problem for people. And while I don't believe in God, Jesus believed in God. And Jesus very much believed that greed went against God's law, and he spoke out against it. So it was a huge problem for him. So I think that kind of shows a friction, constant friction in society, right? Our morals tell us that greed, and this is what's really interesting, actually. Our moral frameworks tell us that greed is bad, that the excessive desire for money is bad. Every religion, every single religion roundly condemns it. And I talked about it in the book. I'm not going to be able to do it off the top of my head, but I kind of went through different religions and what they say about greed. And I think in Islam, they consider it a terrible sin. Hinduism considers it a core sin. Buddhism considers it a core sin. Catholicism considers it a core sin. Every religion, every moral framework condemns greed. And yet, it is part of our culture. It is a deep part of our culture. And in the United States today, I would say it's been raised to a virtue. I mean, greed is really just it literally, that word means the love of money. So it's really the pursuit of wealth. So the pursuit of wealth in this country today is absolutely seen as a virtue. That's a big question. It's a big problem. I don't think there's any simple answer to it of why our moral frameworks condemn greed, but we still embrace greed. I tried to explain it in the book, how culture that developed. So I tried to explain it, but yeah, it's a big issue. It's a big problem.
In religious spaces, I sometimes hear people say that certain American vices emerge from absences. So if you don't feel fulfilled, if you don't have a deeper sense of purpose, if I feel like my life is ultimately ephemeral, maybe doesn't really amount to much in the grand scheme of things, and it's tempting to fill that void, if you will, with other things: power, money, fame, attention, drugs, what have you. But there's another way of looking at it, which is that the pursuit of wealth itself is a kind of religion. And I think you're pointing to that, where, again, Catholicism, the church, but you do say in the book that although the Reformation emerges in opposition to the Catholic Church, very quickly kind of adopts the same ethos around wealth. So about halfway through the book, you're talking about colonialism, the European age of discovery, if you will. And whether they're Protestant powers like Netherlands or in the United Kingdom, they're Catholic powers like France, Spain, Portugal, it's the same underlying ethos, or a very similar underlying ethos, that the pursuit of wealth is itself good. So I'm wondering if you think that this is something that's hijacked religion, or is itself a new and competing religion? And there's a reason I'm going that direction, but it's building off of what Joey said, which is I see this in Muslim communities, certainly, where there's a lot of talk about religion and religious virtue, but effectively we have our own version of the prosperity gospel, a prosperity Quran, if you will. And there's a lot of attention paid to religious mores, traditions, rituals, structures, but at bottom, where you stand in the socioeconomic scheme of things is really deeply important, even if people don't want to admit it. We're all judging each other on that metric.
We are. And I think to go back to where anyone who's sort of arguing that people are pursuing wealth to fill a hole in their life that they don't have because they don't believe in God, I think you're missing the fact that even when people did believe in God, they were pursuing greed. They were pursuing wealth. This is not something that just came about within the last 50 years or the last century. Those are two different things. The fact that more and more people do not believe in God is separate from the fact that greed has been part of our culture for a very long time. So I think that's the first part of that I wanted to address. The second part is, I think, and I can't speak for every religion, and I didn't try to, and again, it's interesting, I should point this out too. What I tried to do very specifically was explain how American attitudes about money developed. So to do that, the narrative arc becomes basically the history of the Catholic Church, the Christian Church, Protestantism, through Europe and back into the Near and Middle East and Mesopotamia. So that's kind of the arc. So I don't try to explain money in terms of every single religion and how they look at it in the whole history. That would have been a much larger book, a much more arduous undertaking. I wanted to hit one specific thing. I want to talk about American values, American beliefs and biases. And so that's why the book mostly focuses around the history of the Christian Church and what happened in Europe. That being said, I think it is very interesting that in Protestantism, you have this movement that arises as a rebellion against the decadence of the Catholic Church, of Rome, justifiably so, and has a lot of different ideas. But one idea that ends up coming through is this idea that if you have money because God wants you to have it. John Calvin's theology was God makes everything that you do because God wants you to do it. God has decided everything. It's predeterminism. If you're good because God wants. If you're bad, you're bad. If you're rich, if you're poor, all of it is because that is what God wanted for you. So you should embrace that. So if you are making money, you're making money because God wants you to make money. So if God wants you to make money, what you should be doing is making as much money as you possibly can. And then there was a very heavy moral element of it. You should be spending that money to the benefit of society. And it's funny, that's the part that always gets lost, right? That part does somehow, it seems to consistently get lost. But the Protestant religions, Calvinism especially, they graft in this idea that the pursuit of wealth is something that God wants. And if you have money, it is a sign that you are favored by God and God wanted you to have money. And that's a good thing. You shouldn't spend it the way the dirty Catholics do. You shouldn't build huge opulent churches. You shouldn't be like them. They're terrible. The spending of money that way is very bad. But the pursuit of money, no, that's okay. That's what God wants. That eventually is the bedrock of what comes over into this country. That becomes a Protestant work ethic. That's what Max Weber later calls it. So the idea somehow, even though you can read the Bible and it's very clear about it, the idea that the pursuit of wealth is a good thing still manages to become part of both Catholicism and Protestantism.
Our sponsor is the Brueggemann Center for Dialogue at Xavier University here in Cincinnati, which is dedicated to deepening understanding across faiths and promoting systemic change. You can learn more about the Brueggemann Center and Xavier University in the show notes. Now, back to the conversation.
So I've heard you say and argue that greed is what caused the development of capitalism. Tell me if I'm wrong about that.
No, I state that very clearly in the book, that greed is basically the cornerstone of capitalism. It just is. I mean, I'm not even saying that. I'm not even putting a value judgment on that. I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. Just it is. It actually is.
And I think it's important to say that that's your perspective, because I think sometimes we see capitalism as the cause, not as the result, right?
Right.
But I mean, I'm not here to say that capitalism has been has been bad for all of human history or something like that. I think it's pulled a bunch of people out of poverty and given people food that didn't have food before it developed, and all these different kinds of stuff. We also have seen a rise in wealth inequality like we've never seen before. And so I know you've said something to the effect of godlike worship of money is what has caused this inequality. What's the corrective that would kind of even the scales a little bit and not lose all of the benefits that this neoliberal sort of system has given the world?
There's no one simple answer to that, right? I can't just say, and I think that's a big problem in our society, actually, on everything. People think that you can just slap one thing on top of whatever your problem is and you're going to fix it. We very much have become a sort of instant gratification culture. I think there's a couple of things, and I've been thinking about this. The real problem is economics has become very, very disconnected from morality. And when they started off, they were not. In fact, Adam Smith was a moral philosopher. Adam Smith, the guy who wrote the foundational book of modern capitalism, right? The Wealth of Nations. He was not just trying to dryly describe an economic system. He wasn't trying to tell people how they could be more efficient and save more money. He was talking about a moral system, and he was holding that system out as more morally valuable than a system where everybody was just a subject of the king or a pope. Morals were an integral part of what he was talking about. What happens is, and basically in the scientific revolution of the 19th century, economics becomes completely divorced from morals. To talk today about economics and morality is probably to get a lot of, side-eyed stares. And I mean, do they even exist in an economics book? You look at an Econ 101 book, and I mean, how often do they talk about morals? They don't talk about morals at all. They don't talk about it at all. Everything is just, this is the system, here's the equation, this is what you can do. I mean, it never gets talked about on Wall Street. They never talk about it. So I think that's a big problem. That's the first problem, because morals are what puts the collar on our greed. And I think I said this at the beginning, greed is part of us. It's another human emotion. It is natural. You can't erase it. We're never going to be able to erase greed in people. What you can do is you can put a collar on it through a moral system. And I think what we have to do, and some people recognize this even within the economics field, there is a small group of people in the economics field that recognize this and are trying to do it, that you have to bring morality back into economics. You have to have some way to direct people's impulses for the benefit of society. That is just what society does. I mean, if we didn't care, we wouldn't even have a society. Everybody would be a subsistence farmer, and we would just all go on and be on our own. The whole point of having a society is that working together, we can build something bigger and better for all of us. And in order to do that, you just have to put some kind, that's what the law is. The law is a guardrail on people's emotions and impulses. You have to have some kind of guardrail on people's emotions and impulses regarding greed. And we have completely wiped those guardrails out certainly in the last 40 or 50 years, because we have turned money into our religion. So I think the big thing is, first you need to understand why we see money as a religion, which is why I wrote the book. Then you have to digest that. Then you have to spread that. You have to sort of like culturally spread that idea. Then, if you can possibly get people to believe all those things, then you can start actually putting in guardrails around greed. And I think that's what needs to happen. Look, I don't think we should have a society where people's ingenuity, people's incentives, people's hard work is not rewarded. I think those things should be rewarded. You can have a culture and an economic system that rewards people, but puts some collar on the degree to which you can indulge in your greed. And I use the word balance in the book a lot, and I come back at the end of it and I say that. I say what we need a society that is in balance between people's individual impulses and what is the best for the group, for society. That's what I think when the United States worked at its best, it was a balance between that. And capitalism can exist within that and still function as capitalism. But you have to have that balance. And right now, we don't have that balance. And you can see it where you have a culture, you have a world where whatever the number is at the moment, it's, 8 people have as much wealth as half the other 4 billion, the bottom 4 billion people on the entire planet. That is a society that is unbalanced. That is the core problem.
Beautifully said. I see what you're describing as corrupting, certainly in the United States. And I think it's happening all around the world. And I'm sure technology, the rapidity with which ideas and images travel around the world, all of that is changing things.
Well, and
A
also, I
very
mean, the United
simple-
States is the dominant world power, and our ideas have traveled. Our ideas have traveled across the internet. Our ideas have traveled across the fact that the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, that our financials markets are the biggest and the deepest and the most powerful. I mean, we have spread that culture around the world. So, yes, I mean, what we have grown up around in this society, in this country, has been exported around the world, without a doubt.
Given that, and I hear you when you say that we should be cautious about, I guess, big picture approaches, that it's not necessarily the case that there's a simple, easy solution to this, that introducing balance and perspective is valuable. You had a piece on your Substack, it's a great Substack, by the way,
Thanks.
where I believe the title was Mamdani was right about one thing. And I'm partial to Mamdani just for tribal reasons, although I don't live in New York. I'm an Ohioan now, although I did live in New York City for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm actually reflexively, I would not say I'm that comfortable with some of the policies that he proposes, right? I understand the energy behind them. I appreciate and actually admire the sentiment behind them. I do think that the inequality is a problem. I think the lack of
The affordability is a
compassion-
problem.
It is a huge problem.
New York's an
but
outrageously expensive city.
New York is crazy. Yeah. I mean, 20 years living there, and I can't now, when I go back and I talk to friends who live there, who've done well some of them have done very well for themselves.
Yeah.
And it's still just obscene thinking about what it costs to live there
Yep.
and what it must be
Yep.
like to be anyone other than a Google employee or a banker. Right.
Right.
And even they're kind of stretched thin. So with that, and given your experience in the space, I'm wondering if you can point to maybe a few policies or ideas, and it doesn't have to be big picture, it doesn't have to be, reinventing the wheel, so to speak, but just things that we could do as a country that might mitigate some of the worst of this or put us on a better track.
Yeah.
Are there certain approaches you see, political ideas, candidates that you think should be getting more airtime or more consideration?
I think part of the problem when you start talking about how to actually fix this is that both political parties in this country are part of the same culture. Both political parties have absorbed the gospel of wealth and the gospel of money, and they respond to that and only that. So it really is not enough to just say, well, the Republicans are money grubbers, we'll vote in the Democrats, they're going to fix everything. The Democrats are money grubbers as much as the Republicans. And you could see that very clearly. I'm going to get on a rant here, sorry. After the crisis in 2008, Barack Obama is elected a Democrat with a mandate. Right? I mean, the country collapsed economically. He had a mandate to rebuild the economic system. And what did he build? The exact economic system we had. That was a sign that the Democratic Party is just as in bed with money and wealth and billionaires as the Republicans. So that's a problem. And if you've read my Substack, like I'm a third party proponent. I actually think we need a third party. That would be my first thing, actually, is we need a major third party in this country that will stand in opposition to both of those parties. I realize that's not realistic, so let's talk about other things. What are some other things you could do? I mean, you could do a lot, actually. You really could. I think you could have a renewed discussion about interest rates and what's an acceptable interest rate. Should a credit card company be able to charge 30% on a card? I think that's a discussion we could have. I mean, discussion about the minimum wage. The minimum wage is kind of ridiculously outdated.
Well, I was going to say with the credit card and the interest rate, you definitely got the Muslim vote, but there's
right.
unfortunately not that many of us currently in the country.
Yeah.
And with immigration policies, you're not going to have a lot of
right.
votes in that department.
But look, I think there are a lot of things you could start doing. I think what Mamdani is really, his platform was really about affordability. And it should be. He's the mayor of New York City. Like, the mayor of New York City's job is not going to be to change the system. So that's what he's focusing, the wider system. It's just, how can I make this city more affordable for my constituents? So that's where his ideas are coming from. Look, you could tax wealth a lot more. You just could. That's not going to happen. That is not even remotely realistic. Neither party would ever support that. But yeah, you could. You could raise taxes a lot more. You could somehow try to put collars on CEO salaries. I mean, just the whole stock option thing, which was supposed to put a collar on CEO salary, ended up being a loophole for them to become even richer than they've ever been. Most of Elon Musk's wealth is tied up in stock options that he exercised over the years. So you could revisit that whole system. There's a lot of things that you could do. Most of them will be extremely controversial because the culture is not prepared for it. And that's the bigger problem. We could sit here for 3 hours and come up with 10 great ideas that have been proposed actually in other places. They're going to go nowhere because the culture is not prepared for it. Because right now the culture believes that the highest virtue in this country is getting rich. And anything you can do to get rich is good, and anything that inhibits that in any way is terrible. And that is what you saw when Mamdani was running, and he made that comment in the interview where he said, I don't think we should have billionaires, and the billionaires flipped out. They flipped out, and that's what I was writing about in my Substack, because it was interesting that the responses to his comment were, how dare he say billionaires are bad? Billionaires are good. Billionaires are what make the rest of us wealthy. Billionaires are how this city becomes so wealthy. We need billionaires. And when I was reading those responses, they were the exact same things that Poggio Bracciolini and his contemporaries were saying 600 years ago. The debate has not changed at all. It has not moved in 600 years.
So absolutely, in American culture, we fetishize becoming rich. We want to become rich. We would hope to become rich, and we are fearful of anything that would stand in the way of us and our destiny.
Just want to interrupt you. I'll let you ask your question, but I'm not holding myself out as apart from that. I am part of this culture too. I'm selling this book at a profit. I'm working at a job. I'm trying to make money. I'm not saying everything I say, I'm not saying because I think I'm better or I'm different from people. I am exactly the same. I am absolutely part of the culture. So that's important. I think it's important for me to
I'm
say.
not blaming you. I mean, these books had to be paid for as well, right? They were
Right.
not creatively borrowed from the library. But what I mean is every people, culture, religion, nation has a founding story, a myth, set of references. Whether we live that history or not, it's still part of our psyche. So in the Muslim tradition, there is, before Islam, a period called Jahiliyyah, the darkness, when the Arabs wandered in a kind of moral dark ages, and they didn't understand right from wrong, and they buried their daughters and all sorts of heinous things. And now Islam comes and the light comes, and we are in a new age. And in the West, certainly there's the dark ages, right? So you identify rightly how there's this shift happening, and part of that shift is how we think about money. So I'm wondering if it's might not be the case, and pushing back a little bit, that it's not that Americans necessarily only want to become wealthy, but could it also be the case that we deeply fear the idea that we would be sent backwards into a medieval period? So we hear that too, that if you shut down innovation, if you stifle the most ambitious, then we will all become poorer, and we will turn into something out of Rocky IV, and we'll have to train in whatever the heck that was, right? Even the irony of the way that people talk about Mamdani, right? I think on Know Your Enemy, the podcast, they jokingly describe New York as a Soviet caliphate. It doesn't even make sense, right? How can you be religiously Muslim and communist? But it has potency and resonance because people fear that. So do you think that maybe, and feel free to knock this away and push it down and reject it, is it maybe that it's more a fear of poverty and backwardness as opposed to a desire for more and more and more?
I mean, I guess those things are probably mirror images of each other. So, there's certainly something to that. This is probably not an either or situation. I do think that there is a myth of progress in this country. We absolutely have sold ourselves a story of the United States as a nation that is consistently progressing and moving, and it was the westward frontier, and it was manifest destiny, and I mean, that is definitely part of our culture and our society here in the United States for sure. I think you're right. Like I said, I think that the fear of losing those things is just the mirror image of the pursuit of wealth and the pursuit of manifest destiny. And I think those two things, I think they're probably very much intertwined with each other. So I think that's part of it for sure.
I want to ask about Jubilee. I know we haven't talked about debt yet, and maybe we're talking about pie in the sky interventions with Jubilee as well. But I was really taken with how you described the social utility of Jubilee and its kind of original inception. And I just wonder, can you imagine a way in which Jubilee could be enacted in our society.
Realistically, no, but to even start to have this conversation, we have to step back and explain it. So one of the things I talk about in the book is a concept that came up in ancient Mesopotamia, which was called an amargi. And it was basically a declaration of blanket debt forgiveness. So money is invented about 5,500 years ago. After they invent money, they invent loans. After they come up with loans, they come up with compound interest. And what they start to realize is that compound interest has this just unmistakable, irreversible habit of growing and growing. And your debts become larger and larger. No matter how much you think you're paying them off, the debts are still there, and they are large. Anybody, I think, who's been paying student loans for 30 years and still has a balance understands exactly what I am talking about. In these ancient societies, this became destabilizing because back then, if you couldn't pay your debts, you lost your farm and you were sold into indentured servitude. You were slavery. You lost everything. And on a large enough scale, that would destabilize an entire society. There were no men to serve in the army. There were no farmers to grow food. Society collapses. So they needed a relief valve. They needed a way to restore balance. What they come up with is what was called an amargi. A king would come to power, or a king would conquer another city, and he would make this declaration. He would wipe out personal debts, all of them. If you were sold into bondage, you were freed from bondage. If you lost your farm, you got your farm back. It was a way for society to start over, to reset the debt clock, essentially. And it hung around for a couple of thousand years, but it was very controversial. The creditor class hated it. They fought back against it. And over the course of centuries and a couple of millennia, they whittled away at it. They fought it and fought it and fought it, and it got whittled away and whittled away and whittled away. And eventually it disappeared. And today, this is just not a concept that is even a remote part of economic thought, that debts can just be, on a blanket basis, debts can be forgiven. You can get your debts forgiven. You go to bankruptcy, but there are severe penalties that come with that. There's a lot of moral, looking down on people because they had to clear back. You're penalized for it. You failed. You failed to pay your debts. It's a bad thing. It's an evil thing. So what I argue in the book is that what we should do today is bring this idea back. I try to put it like this. The United States federal government has about $37 trillion of debt, which will never be paid back. The state governments have another, I forget the number. I added it up, but federal, state, corporate, personal debt, it's like $137 trillion or something just in the United States. Globally, there's more than $300 trillion of debt. Those debts are never going to be paid back. First off, money isn't real. So this is just an accounting fiction. We're just adding up numbers for the sake of adding up numbers. There's nothing real about this. This is all just a system we created to help us keep track of resources. So why are we pretending that these debts are something that are real and they have to be paid back? And if they can't be paid back, you end up with a fiscal crisis. You end up with a meltdown. And that is what will happen. I mean, once you can't pay your debts back, they don't go away. They keep growing and growing and growing. And people are warning about this constantly, right? If the United States doesn't do something about its debt, we're going to have a financial crisis. We're going to have a financial crisis because there is nothing you can do about the debt at this point. It's too large. You can't austerity your way to it. You can't tax your way to it. You probably can't even inflate your way out of it. So what I argue is that rather than just waiting around for these debts to grow and grow to the point where they destabilize society, bring back the amargis, have a global debt jubilee. And what I specifically argue is that we should actually, and I know this will this will trigger people just hearing it, we should print $300 trillion and settle the world's debts. And there are the one reason for that is because I think that's better than actually canceling the debts. Because if you cancel the debts, those are assets on the balance sheets of pension funds, insurance funds, banks, governments. You would destabilize all those institutions. You would bankrupt them. And that would be a different economic crisis. So money is not real. This is all just an accounting fiction. We are holding on to these debts because we have these misguided beliefs about what money is. Wipe it out, start the debt clock over. And then to minimize the damage, because I understand the ramifications of it would be gigantic, right? So it's almost like pretending this is a wartime economy where you have to put in certain rules to keep the economy going. So I would put price caps on things. I would put inflation limits on things, and I would keep those kinds of safeguards in place for a year or two until things settle out. So You let all of society start over. There's no reason for us to pretend that these debts are real and that, oh, there's some moral obligation to repay these debts. There is no moral obligation to pay these debts. They're not real and they are unrepayable. People should not have to spend their entire lives in debt. Governments should not run up debts until they can't pay anymore and then they collapse. These are just ridiculous outcomes that don't need to happen. We need to understand what debt is, what money is and isn't, and how we should control it rather than it controlling us.
Joey, does that answer your question?
I'm glad I asked it.
And
Yeah.
I said that the day I published the book, I went into the city, New York City, and I met with a group of sort of financial professionals, and we talked about this, and they were hot. They were really they thought this was crazy. I got a lot of pushback on this idea. And look, it is a completely unrealistic thing. There's no way. You'd have to, people don't even know what I'm talking about when we talk about debt jubilees. They just don't, the concept is not even part of our culture. So it is completely unrealistic. But I would also argue that it is a far better thing to do and to relieve people of these debts and to relieve governments of these debts and to start over than to just wait until a crisis, which is what we're going to do. We're just going to wait until a crisis comes.
I wonder, do you think there's any validity to this movement of going kind of back to the local economy and the local system, whether it's, local currencies, or I have friends talking about Jubilee on the Cincinnati level here where we live. And the whole intention is to sort of to depart the consumer society, right? And to say, we're going to try to construct alternatives to this system that has dehumanized us, or they would say something like that. Does that resonate for you at all?
I'm not trying to be dismissive, but I don't think it's necessarily practical on a society-wide level. I don't think we're going to deconstruct the entire global society that we have today and everyone's just going to live in a little community. I don't think that's realistic. I don't see going backwards as the answer. However, I will say that I do sense in the world today that a lot of people understand that there are fundamental problems with the system we have created, and that those problems are so unsolvable that we actually have to come up with something completely different. And I think we can, actually. One of the things I say in the book is, today, globally, we could, if we wanted to, as a global society, we could grow enough food to feed every single person on the planet. We could build enough housing to house every single person on the planet. We could provide enough healthcare. We could provide education. We could sew enough clothing. We can generate enough electricity. The globe does have limited resources, but those resources are enough that we could actually provide for all 8 billion people on the planet today the basic foundation that they would need to have a life of true freedom. That is not hyperbole. I actually have citations in the book where I show that. We already grow enough food to feed everybody, and we can come up with ways of growing more. This is not a problem. We are not constrained by our resources. So all those things could be provided. They are not being provided, I argue, because we have created this religion of money and this veneration of wealth. And that is what we have made our Godhead. That is what we have put at the center of our universe, and everything revolves around that. So I think we need to change that focus. The focus shouldn't be on the pursuit of wealth. The focus should be on the well-being of every person on the planet. It doesn't change a lot, actually, of the infrastructure, the physical things we have. It just changes the focus of it. And if our goal was to feed everybody, house everybody, clothe everybody, which, by the way, is a story Jesus tells in the Bible, if we could do all those things, if we put our minds to doing all those things, we could do all those things. We have had a technological revolution in the last 2 centuries that have made that extremely possible. We can do it. And I think what the big friction in the world today is that people realize that capitalism is no longer, it doesn't fit our world today anymore. And that is a focus problem. Capitalism is focused on pursuing wealth. That isn't where we are today. That isn't the best way to provide for everybody. I'll put it to you that way. That is not the best way to provide for everybody. Maybe once upon a time it was, maybe 600 years ago it was. It is not today because we are not constrained by our resources. All we need to do is come up with a better way of distributing our resources. That is what I think a lot of people feel sort of implicitly, but they haven't been able to express it yet or come up with an actual alternative yet. So you do see things like, the deconstruction movement and trying to go local movement. And I think those are fine. If people do it, it works for them. I think that's fine. But I don't think that on a society-wide, on a global scale, I just don't think that's going to work.
It seems to me that there's something Marxian about what you're saying. That capitalism was a stage in human history and it served a purpose, whatever we make of that purpose, and its utility is rapidly decreasing, as I'm hearing you.
Yeah.
It is, to bring this episode full circle, as that young woman said in the class, we went from perhaps capitalism as a means to an end, as beneficial greed as a means to an end, to it becoming the end in itself.
Yes.
And when it became the end in itself, it became increasingly damaging, harmful, caustic, acidic, what have you.
Yes.
So the question that I would throw to you is, what then should the end be? What should we as people aim towards?
I don't know if I know what the actual end should be. I think the goal should be what I just said. The basic goal of our society should be to provide the basic necessities for every single person on the planet. And we can do that. We have the means to do that. We have the resources and we have the technology to do that. And I think that should be the sort of the foundation of what our society is. And after that, I'm not saying that should be it. That can exist along with the system that rewards people for their ingenuity, their hard work, their creativity. If, you come up with a new cell phone that's great and you can sell it and make $10 million, that's great too. All those things can happen. And I don't think those two things really necessarily. I think the problem is that we've come up with this sort of either or. It's like you can't have both. You can't do both. You either have to have a society that just allows people to pursue wealth and everybody else is screwed, or you're going to have a Marxist, communist, totalitarian state where everybody is on the same level, but everybody eats. I think those two things can coexist. I think you can have a society that absolutely makes sure that everybody has the basic foundation that they need for a life. And then you can have a society that also rewards people for their creativity and ingenuity and hard work. And I think the way to do that is to, first off, have a global Almightier where you wipe out all the debts and start over. And once we have cleaned the slate, you can start to refocus society on what's really important. And what's really important is making sure that every person is taken care of. And I know that sounds really pie in the sky and maybe naive and maybe silly. And I think I probably thought that when I was 13 and it seemed ridiculous. And it seems kind of ridiculous now because it's not realistic, but it's correct.
I like that. Every 7 years, right? And then every 7 year, we get the big guy.
Right.
So there we go.
Yeah.
Haroon, bring us home with a lightning round.
So my initial lightning round question was going to be mo money, mo problems, true or false. But I figure that's probably not the best use of a lightning round question.
My answer would be false, by the way.
It's not true. More money.
Well, are we talking about an individual level or society?
Or are you a Tupac guy? Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not into big, yeah.
Oh, he's a Springsteen guy. We know
I'm
if you,
a
Joe,
Springsteen
if you
guy,
read the Substack,
No, but I mean, really,
that.
reality is people pursue wealth for a very good reason. Having money is important. Like, having money matters in this culture. If you have money, you are going to live longer. You're going to live better. I mean, I don't blame people for pursuing wealth. That's one thing I think I did well in the book is I was not very tut-tutty about the pursuit of wealth. We've made it a necessity, and it is a necessity. So more money is not more problems. More money is fewer problems.
Here's my actual 3 questions. So the first is, young college student just starting out, pursuing a career or profession, what have you. What would you have them read to break through? As you pointed out, we have fields that are siloed. We have an economics profession and discipline that doesn't think about ethics, morality. What would you point that person to at the start of their education?
I mean, look, first off, I'll be extremely selfish and say, read my book. But then I would say, I would actually encourage you to read the books I talk about in the book, because there's a lot there. One of the things I did, I think I found a lot of books that have kind of been forgotten, but are still very important. So actually, if you didn't even want to buy my book, I'll accept that. Take it out of the library. That's a very good place to do it. And then go look at the references in the back and go buy some of those books. The guys at I think it's the London School of Economics. There's a movement I think it's the London School of Economics, where I was talking about groups that are trying to bring morality back into economics. And they're a group that is trying to do it. I don't have it in front of me, so I don't have the name, but I know they're at the London School of Economics. Try to read people that are thinking about the world in different ways. There are a lot of people that have been brought up, have been educated sort of in the standard way, and their ideas are standard and their answers are standard. And you read them. If you're in the markets, you see them, you know who they are exactly. Try to find people who are thinking about world. Oh, you know what? I have a good one. I have one specific good one. This is it. This is what I would tell people to go read. There's a Substack called Yes, I Give a Fig. And it's from a guy named Michael Green. He just wrote this the other day. It's called Part 1, My Life is a Lie. Go find that and read that. Go read that. He talks about the government's poverty level, how they measure it, and how inadequate it is to explaining what we need today just to function in this society. And it really sparked a lot of online debate. It was really interesting. Go read that. That's where I would start.
That's great. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Question number 2, lightning round.
Zohran Mamdani is taking the oath of office, I think, early January 2026, on a Quran, I should point out, just in case Greg Abbott is listening. I don't think Greg Abbott is listening, but just in case he is, that would be exciting. He calls you and says, hey, join my team of advisors. You say, I'm really busy. I have time for one Zoom conversation. He's like, all right, cool. Got a whole
Who's asking me this? Greg Abbott or Zohran Mamdani?
This is Mamdani. Or maybe it's Abbott. I mean, there's a question I didn't anticipate. But it's Mamdani, and he's got all these promises, free buses, freeze the rent, what have you. What would you tell him if you had just a few minutes to tell him something? What would you tell him?
I would tell him to think even bigger. I think he's on the right track. I do. I think he's going to have problems because he's in the Democratic Party, but I think he's on the right track. So I would tell him to think bigger. And to actually be honest, if anybody from his group is out there, I'm really trying to get my book into his hands. I want him to read it because I think he would get it and I think he'd appreciate it. But yeah, that's what I would tell him. Think bigger, I mean, city grocery stores is a good idea. Free bus is a good idea. Child care those are good ideas. Think bigger and then try to connect with people. And I'm sure he's already done all this, within the Democratic Party that have the same ideas and build from the ground up. You're not going to be able to do it from the top down because the institutional resistance is too hard. I'm sure I'm not telling you, he clearly was doing this. Build your movement from the ground up. And local races, local positions, local power, build all that stuff and then push upwards and just keep going on the road he's going down. Because people get a 33-year-old nobody doesn't come out of, nowhere and become the mayor of New York City because he's, handsome and charming. He's saying things that people are absolutely responding to because they are living it. And Donald Trump did the same thing. He said things that people responded to because they were living it. He didn't mean any of it, but he said it and he got a response because of it. I think Mamdani actually means it. So I would tell him to think bigger and keep going down the road he's going down.
That was a good one. Last and final question. You are only able to take one musician with you on a road trip. Who would it be?
Bruce Springsteen. I mean, it's easy. That was so easy. I was, dead or alive. Wait, dead or alive? Dead, it might be a different answer.
It would be weird to have a dead musician in your car, though. That could.
Well, you're not a religious person, so you don't believe people can come back.
That's
so
true.
I
don't.
You can't get it.
You don't know if that's true. That's
there's a lot I could think about, but the first answer that comes to my head, of course, is Bruce Springsteen. I'm born and raised in Jersey. I'm a Jersey guy. I think anybody in Jersey is going to answer that the same way. So sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry not to come up with something more creative.
I love it.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Zach Swellbar for recording our theme music. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know what questions we should be asking and who else we should be talking to.